that's what I say to my teachers. We don't talk about what we need to do with parents. We've got children here, we're going to do it, but we do need to talk about that. I was just sharing a situation with my two boys before they turned 18, got speeding tickets. I had to attend the safety class with them. What about parents when their children are suspended? I'll just tell you this. There are some situations with young children, kindergarten through 3rd grade, who will turn the room upside down. We're pulling the entire class out several days, a month, the whole class, so we can get the child settled down and they don't hurt someone else. It happens.
Okay, you'll need to wrap up now.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Tom.
Tom Smith, Superintendent. I'll try to be very quickly. You asked a question about resources. There are no state funds for alt-ed in elementary school. It's entirely at the local dollar. Some school divisions have the ability, some don't. So when you're tying their hands in terms of keeping the school safe, it presents them with a real problem. The second thing is that in terms of very serious behaviors, you heard drugs, guns, and children that are convicted of crimes. I had a situation in which a young 3rd grader exhibited some very serious sexual behavior, what that child had seen at home and on TV. In this situation, I suspend that child on Monday. Regardless of what happens, they come back the next Monday. That is not going to be the time, even if I had the funds, to set up any kind of program to work with that child. Getting the parents' attention sometimes, right, wrong, or indifferent, however you want to say, sometimes takes time. If they don't want to make or can't make the changes at home, then the 5 days they wait out and the child comes back with no change in behavior. So we would like the 5 days, even though it's better than nothing, we would like to see that extended.
And how far?
I think that to go back to, we don't suspend children for 90 days, but we have to have flexibility in how we handle things. So it's something longer than the 5.
Okay, longer than the 5.
Well, longer than the 5, if you wanted to, if we had a way of extending it past that for these children we don't get cooperation with or exhibit extreme behaviors that are not included, that might provide us some way of getting past the
Council, would the current bill permit, I mean, is 5 days it, or could they be 5 and 5 and 5, depending on an interim evaluation? I'm just curious in your reading of it.
Mr. Chairman, are you asking if you could have consecutive
5-dayers?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would say you could have a 5-day suspension. The kid comes back on day 6 and misbehaves. You could have another 5-day suspension again there. But
so there's no prohibition to consecutive, but there'd be a period where the child would actually show up. Stacy?
That's correct. The way it's currently drafted, we have to let the child come back if the child engages after 5 days. If the child does something else, we could suspend them for another 5 days. And I'll just add, with what you just did with the long-term suspension bill that you just heard, I think a lot of these concerns go away because if we could long-term suspend these students, you just limited long-term suspensions to 90 days. So you asked Tom what would be, if we could get long-term suspensions back in, that would go a long way towards resolving our concerns.
I'm going to do say, you want to just come up briefly and just tell us who you are and your position on the bill?
Scott Alchenko from Stafford County, elementary school principal, and I live that same story, opposed to the bill as amended.
Okay, I'm going to give proponents 2 additional minutes. Yes, ma'am.
Billy, I would just say to your question on the consecutive 5 days, we do want to make sure that punishments are tied to a specific incident and that children have opportunities to come back in and demonstrate they can be in the school building. There would absolutely be the opportunity to suspend them again for another 5-day period, and I think at that age, with what we know about symptoms of disabilities and trauma and other issues, consecutive 5-day suspensions may tell us something about what that child needs beyond exclusion.
Okay, there are going to be questions from the committee briefly. Are there other proponents who would like to consume the additional minute? Okay, Delegate Cole.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to make a comment. My wife's a teacher, my daughter's heard some stories. While we're focused on the child who is the discipline problem, and certainly that child has needs and needs to be focused on, what we're ignoring is the impact that child can have on the learning environment for other children and also for teachers. I mean, we already have a hard time hanging on to teachers. If you're going to force that teacher to have to put up with a child that's a serious discipline problem, like kids don't get suspended over minor offenses. All right? It's got to be serious before they get suspended. So, I mean, and discipline problems are a reason why some teachers leave the profession. And I just don't think, I think we're focused too much on the offending child, and certainly the offending child has needs and needs services and stuff, without considering the disruption or threat to the other children that child may pose.
Elder Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With respect to Delegate Cole's comments, I don't think anyone wants to force those bad behaviors in the classroom. What we're looking for are alternative methods to educate the child, other than putting them on the street. Now, what I'm hearing here today is there are very few of those for this age group. There's no money to have any. If that's the case, then someone please tell me how, if 5 days doesn't work, how does 10 days work? How does 15 days work? How does 30 days make this better if there's no alternative for them? Because I don't understand that. And Mr. Chairman, you know, statistics are a wonderful thing. We all live in a world of numbers. We use numbers for everything. And I get that. But I'm talking about people, and I'm not talking about statistics. I'm talking about the lives of young people. And when we start making them into statistics, then what we're saying is, however small that percentage is, they're expendable. We're saying that they're just collateral damage in the bigger picture. And that may be what a lot of people think. But I can tell you right now, that's not what this man thinks. I think if we were talking about statistics in terms of childhood disease, and only 1% of the children were affected, we'd see it totally differently. They would no longer be collateral damage. They'd no longer be expendable. And I don't think this is much different, because the damage done at this age, at any age really, a school-age student, is often irreversible. If suspension and expulsion are tools, if we're going to call them tools, and those are going to be the tools in your toolbox, then I would suggest to you that it's kind of like having nothing but a hammer in your toolbox, and then everything looks like a nail. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it's a statement, because I've been real quiet. And, you know, this is hard as an educator to speak against. And as an assistant principal and a principal of a parochial school, leadership has to make tough decisions. And we don't have all the tools in public schools, and we know that. Fortunate in my district that we have an alternative placement for our young ones all the way through. But every district doesn't have that. I realize that. But I too know that the climate and culture of a school needs to be protected as well as the child who is presenting. No child is expendable, no person is expendable for any reason. But until we, meaning us, those who provide the funds, realize that the alternatives, you know, they don't even have, can't even add an additional in-school suspension person because they don't have the money to do that. If they had that, then they would have a choice or options. And you know, to my friends over here who you know I love dearly, I don't want any child to ever be suspended. But until we have more supports. You can't hold a meeting with a parent in 5 days, especially if the parent is working. So, you know, there's a whole lot more to the discussion than just cut off one option that we have, when what we're hearing from both sides is that it's used minimally for the children who are having the most problems. And as a black woman, you know, I don't like that the numbers are so high because they're disproportionately minority students that we're suspending and expelling. So, you know, I have a lot of issues just with this in general. But I don't want to take away from an administrator or a district options that they have, because they're doing all they can to work with the families, but they got to protect the 400 minus the 10, or whatever the number might be. And that's my editorial on that. Thank you.
Delegate back, thank you, ma'am.
I don't know where to start on this one, but I will say this. I agree with the chair. 5, 10 days, at the end of the day, it's a wash. What's the difference? My main concern or main thought when I think about the suspension is that young lady or that young man will return to that classroom at some point. And when I taught, it was almost as if a child misbehaved in my classroom and I wanted to fix it myself because I knew the circumstances that the child was going to back home. And everyone is making the argument of the parent, the parent, the parent. But we all know that sometimes it's the parent that provides the trauma or the parent that isn't providing the guidance at home. And I don't think it's a race issue. I think when we look at discipline, it's just the issue of, I mean, especially all the conversations we're having right now as it relates to drug epidemics. Those children, whether it's the parent overdosing or the parent being hauled off to jail, that child returns to that classroom the next day. No one's asking that. I mean, we have some great teachers that say, hey, how you doing, Johnny? You know, when they come in, but no one's asking that child or going through that child and providing that quality trauma support. So I agree with everyone that said there's other things we can do, and I hope that we can do those things. But I just want to make sure it's clear that I just don't think the suspension piece of the toolbox is the key to addressing our real challenges in our public schools as it relates to discipline. What we really need to do is look at as alternatives to suspension. And I feel for, I mean, when we have this conversation, I feel less for the larger school districts because, like in Henrico, we had as you all know on the floor yesterday, I had the grad students. And I didn't go into great detail of who the grad students are, but they know who the grad students are, and they know how a student got into the grad program. They got into the program because they were long-term suspended or expelled. But they need a second chance. They should have a second chance. And we don't want to send them home, particularly in the same environments that cause them to behave in the fashion that they are behaving. So I say when you send them home, especially for an extended period of time, it's like a snowball effect. It's worse when they return than when you send them home. So I say I'm all for the 5-day, and I guess I'm a big old teddy bear and I always want to compromise, but this is one that I would love to stay at the 5 days.
Okay, other comments from the committee? Delegate Herman?
Yeah, what I'd like to add to this is it is a very difficult question, and I certainly appreciate the efforts and the intentions of the patron. I think Delegate Hester's comments were very close to my thinking, and had I not met with my school board chairman before session and posed the question of how is the drug epidemic in child outweigh the challenges that the schools face as they try to maintain a constructive environment for the rest of the children who would be affected by some pretty extreme behavior. And I think I would have to, in this case, vote on behalf of the recommendations that this not be a burden placed on the schools. I wish we had some other alternatives here that would make me feel confident that the concerns of the patron were being addressed and these kids were not just kind of being pushed out into the cold. But I haven't heard those, and so it's a very difficult decision. I'll just drop that out.
Let me just say, and I know Chairman Bell expected this because this is the way he runs this committee. We have had an extended discussion on this, and I'm going to go to him as a courtesy as the patron to make closing remarks. But if I could just make some brief comments, this is a tough one. It's a tough vote because I'm hearing the teachers. This is really a hard vote, actually. I'm hearing the teachers talk, and I'm married to a former teacher, and I'm not going to recount all the interesting stories that have come home for a matter of privacy. It's just not appropriate to do. But there's some remarkable things, I say in the negative, that occur in a classroom sometimes. And I worry, personally, about whether or not we have the tools to get the attention, not so much of the kids sometimes, but the parents. And we are seeing, and I think we would all agree, that this is a universal problem in the country today, is there are consequences to families that are dysfunctional. There are. And they show up and they manifest themselves in the things that we're seeing. The patron is bringing us a bill that he feels very strongly that we've got to think about the kid and the consequences of keeping the kid out of instruction and depriving the kid of the opportunity to continue to grow and mature in a proper setting. Sometimes things are really bad. You have to find a way to deal with it. So this is a tough vote, no matter how you come down on either side, but I just want to say personally, as a friend and a colleague, I appreciate the fact that he has brought this bill because, people say, well, it's an easy thing, we have big budget stuff. Look, this is an important thing to consider, and I want to compliment you for bringing it, and I would yield the mic to the patron for closing remarks before we move to a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. I appreciate the kind remark. I think that I was a good teacher. And I think that because I learned more than I ever taught. I came away from a teaching career with the feeling that every child was gifted and every child was at risk. And with respect to Delegate LaRock's and Delegate Cole's remarks, I get that. Every parent wants their child to get the full extent of the education, the instruction in the classroom. I get that. But for every behavior we see that results in suspension or expulsion, there is an antecedent to that behavior. And if, as they suggested, Delegate LaRock suggested, that's coming from the home, or something that happened even before the child was born in terms of an addiction, then I'm still having a really tough time understanding how sending the child back into that environment for extended periods of time fixes it. I understand the burdens on the schools. I understand that some schools probably, those with the better resources have alternative programs. But I know for a fact that many don't. I would like to see the children stay in school and for us to figure out ways to keep them there, not necessarily in the classroom. I don't think anything in this legislation suggests that the behavior problem child stays in the classroom. That doesn't say that anywhere. But I'll go back to what I said with an opening statement. I have never seen much good come from suspension, long-term suspension, or expulsion. The bottom line is, there's no evidence. There's no evidence to suggest that long suspensions or expulsions deter misconduct or improve school safety. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we've had I think a fulsome discussion on the issue, and we operate by motion. And remember, we have a substitute that we have before us. Is there a motion on the substitute?
Move the substitute.
There's a motion duly seconded to move the substitute. Any discussion on the motion?
Just to adopt the substitute?
No, we adopted the substitute
Oh, we
earlier.
adopted the substitute. Okay.
We did.
All right.
But we'll adopt it again. All in favor of the substitute, say aye. All right, now, is there a motion on the substitute?
Mr. Chairman, I move to report the substitute.
There's a motion to report the substitute duly seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor of supporting or reporting the bill will signify by raising their hand. All opposed? The bill reports. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I yield the mic back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for taking the helm. I think we're finished. There is no other business before the subcommittee. Let me extend my heartfelt thanks to members of the subcommittee, to the staff. You've done tremendous work. Thank you for it.